I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest today is Steve Burgess, one of the world's leading hypnotherapists and a specialist in past life regression. I'll be talking with Steve about his book, Adventures of a Hypnotherapist. Was I Under? Steve Burgess, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Thanks for having me on, Stan. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The profession you are now in, one in which you have devoted your life to helping others heal by using the phenomenal power of their subconscious minds, was not the profession you set out to become. It is, in fact, one you fell into by accident. Could you, Steve, describe this odyssey that changed your life?
Yeah, I like the word odyssey as well, Stan. That's brilliant. It really has been. Yeah, 33 years ago, I was a director of a publishing company and everything was going well. And then we went bust and took some of my money with it. I had to think about doing something fairly quickly. And my father had been playing with hypnotherapy for some time. Now, my father's a scientist by profession and he'd tried to give up smoking many times. Nothing had worked. And one day he went to see a hypnotherapist, and this therapist laid him in a comfortable chair and relaxed him and talked to him quietly and softly about being a non-smoker. And my dad didn't want cigarettes anymore. And he couldn't understand this. It didn't make sense. So his left brain, his scientific left brain, it didn't compute, did not make sense. So he started to read up about hypnosis and became fascinated. And so much so that he trained as a hypnotherapist and then started working from home just with family and friends. It was a hobby, really. And people heard about him, so he would, help people with different issues. And so he said to me, well, why don't you have a think about being a hypnotherapist? So I thought, well, I knew very little about it, but went into it, got trained. And I was very lucky because it's almost like I was coming home into something that I should have been doing. And I always say that some people are natural therapists in the same way that some people are natural sports people, some people are natural musicians, some people are natural therapists, and I'm a natural therapist. So I got started and really never looked back, and great successes in the early days helping people to stop smoking. And then my sort of therapeutic portfolio just became wider and wider to such a degree that I then started to help people with all sorts of issues. And 33 years later, over 15,000 therapy sessions later, here I still am.
I would be amiss, Steve, if before going any further, I didn't ask you about the second part in the title of your book. The first part, Adventures of a Hypnotherapist, I get. The second part, I don't fully get. So that's why I would like you to tell me what's the reason for you calling the second part of your title, Was I Under?
It's funnily enough, it was my father's idea. When he read the manuscripts, he said, why do you call the book Was I Under? The reason is because I put some words in the book about the fact that whenever people talk about hypnosis or hypnotherapy, they talk about being under hypnosis. And it becomes like a red rag to a bull because hypnosis is a form of relaxation. And you don't go under relaxation. You don't go under a relaxed state. Hypnosis is a trance. You don't go under trance. You go into relaxation. You go into hypnosis. You go into trance. So I'll be honest, if I had a pound for the number of times over the years, Stan, when a client at the end of a session, after I've explained this to them, ad nauseum, you're not going to be asleep, you're not going to be in a coma, you're not under anesthetic, you'll be able to hear everything they're saying, you'll be able to hear sounds outside the room, you'll be able to, if you need to, get up and go for a pee halfway through. You're not under anything. But the number of times at the end of a session, the client comes out of trance and they say, well, I don't think I was under. I could hear what you were saying, or I could have opened my eyes if I wanted. And so, I grit my teeth because this has happened for the 4,000th time. I say, look, you're not under anything. I did explain that. So I sort of make a bit of play about this because I've tried to make the book as funny as I possibly can, although it's also quite shocking in parts as well and very serious in other parts. But I wanted some of my sort of humor to come through. So Was I Under was like a funny subtitle.
I thank you for that explanation. You, Steve, have completed thousands of past life regressions, helping your clients get their lives back on track by resolving issues that have hampered their growth and happiness. In that regard, have you found certain issues people come to you with for help are more prevalent than other issues?
Yes and no. I always count myself as what I call a hypnotic GP, a hypnotic general practitioner. So I don't specialize in treating any one thing. Some therapists do. Anxiety is one of the main things that we treat as hypnotherapists and regression therapists. It's like there's an epidemic of anxiety out there. Also, phobias, depression responds very well to regression therapy, and physical issues. I work a lot with clients who have physical problems and have had incredible success, thankfully, with helping them to heal physical issues. But having said that, every issue that we have as a human being stops us from living our life freely. Every issue that we take to the doctors, every issue that we take for therapy can come from the past. They come from traumas in the past. So the regression model is that all of the issues we have as human beings are caused by locked in feelings and emotions from past traumas. And the regression process is about going back into those traumas to release the energy and the emotions that are causing the problem in the first place. And when you do that, then the problem just dissolves away. To answer your question, yes, certainly some things are very prevalent in the therapy setting, but actually regression can work with virtually anything.
Included in the 15,000 plus therapy sessions you've conducted are cases that explored alien contact experiences and the releasing of spirit attachments. Can you, Steve, share a case from each of those categories?
The alien abduction stuff has got two aspects to it, Stan. I'll share a case first of all, but if I may, then I'll maybe expand a little bit in terms of what's been happening in the last year from an alien past life perspective, which isn't in the book because obviously I wrote the book a couple of years ago. For me, one of the most interesting and what for me cases which proves the reality of extraterrestrial contact is a case where I was called by a Sky TV producer to see if I would regress a lady whose family believed that they'd had some sort of ET or contact experience or possibly even abduction experience. And so this was for a TV show that Sky produced some years ago called The Real 4400, which is actually still on YouTube, I believe. And what had happened was this family, it was a lady called Rachel and her mom, and Rachel's two young sons who were about 10, 11 years old. And what had happened one day is that they had gone for lunch in a restaurant close by the home. As they were driving back home, a spacecraft suddenly came right down alongside the car, started shining lights into the car, and they were all obviously amazed, but they all had this incredible sense of euphoria. And all of a sudden, this happened for seconds. And then the next thing, the spacecraft just shot off at the speed of light and disappeared. And they were all left feeling very crestfallen and disappointed. And all they could do, obviously, was talk about this incredible experience all the way home. But they arrived home to find that a journey which should have taken 20 minutes had taken an hour and 20 minutes. They'd lost an hour of their life. So they had this missing time experience and they knew something had happened, but they didn't know what. They had no conscious memory. And it was troubling to them. They were very upset about it. The boys were getting nightmares and anxieties over it. It was just such a big experience, but they had no proof that anything had happened. I agreed to regress Rachel, the mom, to see if we could take her back to find out what had happened that day. And this is all on camera. So I guided her into trance, into a gentle hypnotic state. guided her back to the day of the incident. And she then remembered what had happened is as she was driving the car and the spacecraft came down, it then took the car up into the air beneath the spacecraft. In some way, they were taken out of the car and into the spaceship, which was very dark inside, and there were lights flashing and things like that. And they knew there were some beings behind the screen which were telepathically communicating with them. They wouldn't show themselves. And they all felt this incredible feeling of euphoria again. And then lights came out like orbs, and these orbs started to move up and down around Rachel. And she found it was quite funny. It was almost like, this is weird. It was like these orbs, these lights were almost x-raying her is probably the way we would know it, or scanning her. And it did the same to her mom. Then, as she was in trance, she had a big smile on her face, and suddenly she became very scared and very tense. And she said, "No, don't hurt the boys. Don't hurt the boys." And then she relaxed again. It's okay. She said, they're reassuring me they're not going to hurt us. They're not going to hurt the boys. They're just checking things out. So this scanning of them went on for some time before they were put back into the car. The car was lowered back onto the road, and they went off on the road, and the spacecraft shot off at the speed of light. The relief that she had and the relief that that brought to the family was immense, because they now knew something had happened. What I will always say with this work, Stan, is that I don't lead my clients. I'm very cautious about this. I use what we call clean language. So I'm not saying, well, tell me about the spacecraft you went into. No, 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 no. She came up with all the information. At the end of the recording, the producer asked me, he said, "Do you feel that that was real?" Now, I'm always looking for particular signs when I do regression sessions. For me, all the regression signs were there. And so for me, as I look back on that, I'm totally convinced that that family had that abduction experience. Also, because there's no good reason why they should have pretended that they had an abduction experience, because obviously they were laying themselves open to ridicule. As you probably know, so many people who come out having had contact experiences are ridiculed terribly. So they had no benefit to actually sharing this sort of story. So for me, that was very, very real. And so that's one of the ET experiences that I write about in the book. But going on from that, if I may, is what's been happening in the last year or two for me and my team. I have a team of hypnotherapists, regression therapists who I've trained in my regression system. They're all very experienced. And I pass work onto them because I just get so busy all the time. I've got so many clients coming in all the time. And we all found that at the end of 2023, for a period of about 3 months, we started to have clients who came to us for therapy who went back into past lives on other planets as other life forms, non-human life forms. And the extraordinary thing was that I've had that occasionally happen over the years, not very often, but maybe once every 5, 10 years, somebody has a past life on another planet. For example, I had a gentleman in Norway some years ago, because I used to run a lot of hypnotherapy courses in Norway. And this gentleman relived a past life where he was an extraterrestrial who crash landed on Earth. He survived the crash, but then he spent some time terrified on Earth trying to hide away from everybody and the authorities, etc., because he knew if he'd been caught, he would be in trouble. Because especially we know what the Americans are like when it comes to extraterrestrials, or the American government, sorry, not the American people, because they're wonderful. And he spent the whole of the session in trance, and he kept saying, "What's wrong with them down here? What is wrong with them? It doesn't have to be like this." And he was realizing that he'd come from a higher place where people live with intelligence, and he'd come down onto planet Asylum, and he felt all the fear of all that. Fortunately, what happened is his people did come for him, and it was a little bit like E.T. Phone Home, where then he went back up into the spacecraft, and they took him back to his home planet. That sort of thing happened occasionally. And then For a period of 3 or 4 months at the end of 23, start of 24 last year, me and my team found that day after day we were regressing clients back into past lives, and they went back into non-human form as extraterrestrials on other planets. And what we sort of found, and a lot of these people have found it very difficult to fit in their lives on Earth. They've never felt comfortable here. Often they've been very sensitive. Then they've, had trouble at school, etc. And it looks like I say that they also have the home planet is where they're actually from. It's as if they're not really human beings. They've been sent here for a reason at this time on Earth. And my belief, and I can't quantify this, but this is my belief, is that they're here on Earth as what would are called star seeds, and I'm sure you've heard the phrase, which are these people or beings who were sent to Earth in order to raise our vibrations, in order to channel, if you like. It's like they have a direct line to those up there who are able then to, and they're bringing down a higher energy onto Earth, which hopefully is helping. I believe there's a great awakening taking place on Earth nowadays, having looked at so many things for so many years. And I think they're part of the great awakening. I think they're going to help us through the mess that we're actually in right now, and help us to come through this and win out over the controlling powers that don't want us to be free. With regard to spirit attachments, this is something that I don't find all the time, but more regularly than people like to think. Sometimes I have clients who have a spirit attached to them. And this is a spirit of a person or a thing that has died, but has not fully passed over, that remains earthbound. But, one form of spirit, an earthbound spirit, is a ghost. But some spirits, because they're lost or confused or scared, they sometimes will not move on fully. And they then will sometimes attach themselves to a person. And what happens then is we pick up on their energies. If that spirit is lost and hurt and scared, we feel their energies, and we don't know why we're feeling like this. And then we go to the doctor saying I'm depressed and get tablets. But the fact is, there's a spirit attachment causing the problem. It does appear generally that people who are in a low mood, they tend to be more open to spirit attachments. It's actually said that they can attach onto anybody, even if your mood is very high. But generally, if your energies are higher, you are shinier, and it's harder for them to hook into us. Whereas if you're low and depressed and unhappy, you tend to be an easy target for them. And what I've found is that, people often get scared by this concept, but very few of these spirits are not nice. Most of them are just lost and just need sending home. And we go through a protocol to send them home where they can fully move on into the spirit world and continue their journey as a soul over their lifetimes to come. And what happens is when we do that, the client feels a lot of relief, and often but really quite different inside, because what has been causing the problem is no longer there. So, occasionally we'll come upon a spirit which is a little bit more nasty or unpleasant, but they will always move on at some stage if we do the right work.
A woman who came to you suffering from a serious and rare liver condition, she had been given only 6 months to live by her consultant, is now alive thanks to hypnotherapy. Can you, Steve, elaborate on that case?
I actually start the book with this because it's still one of the great triumphs of my career, if you like. So this lady came to me, she was in her mid-30s, an ex-police officer in the UK. She had this rare liver disease called focal nodular hyperplasia. I'd never heard of anything like this. Only about 12 people in the UK have this at any one time. Nobody survives it, and hers was the most aggressive. And the disease is such that tumours, they're not cancerous tumours, but they're tumours which grow on the liver, and they grow to be the size of grapefruits, you could say. And what happens is the resulting pain is awful because these tumors push all the internal organs all around the place into the wrong place. The liver stops functioning correctly. The sufferer feels toxic all the time, and she was just in absolute pain. So this lady had to be helped up to my office by two people, and she sat in front of me, and she looked like a stick insect, Stan. She was lost so much weight. She spent most of the day just laying on a sofa or a bed in pain, feeling sick. She had a young daughter. She couldn't do anything with this young daughter. She was doped up to the eyeballs on morphine. And this specialist had he'd done his best, but he said, there's nothing else I can do. I'm guessing you've got about 6 months to live. She sat in front of me and said, you're my last hope. I talked to her about the emotional causes of illness, because every illness has emotional causes. With the liver, it's the anger that's locked in to the liver. And she quite understood this concept. So in our first session, I guided her into trance, and I gave her some post-hypnotic suggestions to relieve the pain, because the pain was so bad for her. And some post-hypnotic suggestions about how she's going to start to feel better and move on in her life. And we're going to do some good work together. And she came out of trance and she looked very different. The pain had gone from 10 out of 10 to 4 out of 10 in half an hour. So I taught her some self-hypnosis, and she went home. She came back a week later. She'd come off all of the morphine. She didn't need it anymore. The pain, she had completely the pain under control using self-hypnosis. Generally, the pain was down to about 2 out of 10. And she'd got her life back. She was starting to eat again. Whereas before she felt nauseous all the time, she was starting to eat again. So two things happened here. One is we began working on the emotional causes of the illness. We did work on her childhood to release childhood trauma. And there were 2 past lives which were causing this liver disease. In the first past life, she was a Native American squaw, and a raiding party came into her village, and a brave came up behind her and grabbed her and stabbed her in the back and killed her. Of course, guess where the dagger went? It went straight through where the liver is in this life. In the second past life, she went into the Second World War as a young teenage Polish boy who was bayoneted to death by the Nazis and then thrown into a river. And of course, guess where the bayonets went? Again, straight through where the liver is. And I will actually say that a lot of past life regression work is about releasing death trauma in previous lives. We worked through both of those past lives, and we did a lot of work to help her to heal. Now, what then happened is the tumors stopped growing, which is unheard of. The tumors actually stopped growing. And her surgeon, her specialist, her consultant, then thought that, well, she's now strong enough to do surgery on. And it was a surgery that she'd had done twice previously. And twice previously, it was a complete disaster. The first time he damaged the liver itself. The second time, the gallbladder was damaged so badly, it had to be removed. And basically, this is a surgery where he had to implant it, to push a plastic tube, having made a slit in the groin, through blood vessels up to the liver, and then try to push crystals and coils, force them up the plastic tube to the liver. And the idea was then these things would attach themselves to the tumors, cut off the blood supply, and then they'd die. And that's the theory. But one of the problems is, in order for her surgeon to see what he's doing, she had to drink dye down before the surgery. And this poor lady was highly allergic to virtually everything. So in the operating theatre, she's just spent all the time vomiting and retching and vomiting and retching. And the poor surgeon is trying to do a delicate operation on a body which is just moving all the time. And she turned up at my office one Monday morning and said, well, I saw my consultant last week. He wants to do the surgery again. And my voice said, we'll do the surgery in hypnosis. Then I realized I just said those words. I was very surprised. Who the hell said that? And she said, okay, well, I'll have a word with the surgeon. He was happy to go ahead. So we did the surgery without any anesthetic. I went into the operating theatre with her, took her into trance. I disassociated her out of her body, having anesthetized her body with the mind. So we did some hypnoanesthesia. So the body was anesthetized. It couldn't feel anything. And then I guided her up all the 13 floors of the hospital. And we went on an imaginary, visionary journey around the universe, all the way through the surgery. The surgeon got on with his job. At the end of the surgery, he couldn't believe it. He turned to me, did the surgeon. He said, I have never, ever seen anything like this in my career. He said it was like operating on a dead body. There were no defensive reflexes. Also, the surgery took like, I think, 90 minutes, whereas the previous times it had been several hours. And she was out of hospital 2 days later. And that lady is now 29 years past her die-by date. She even subsequently had a child. So this is A, the power of the subconscious mind, and B, the power of regression therapy to work on releasing the emotional traumas of illness in order that the illness gets weaker and weaker.
You've performed therapy on the Great Wall of China and the Inca Trail in Peru. What, Steve, were the vibes, the energy like working at those ancient mystical sites? And did they differ, if indeed they did at all, from performing therapy at locations that don't have the history of the Great Wall and the Inca Trail?
That's a really interesting question, Stan. I've never thought of this. I didn't notice any sort of difference in energy. That could have been because generally I was doing the therapy sessions after a day's walking. And usually what had happened is after a day's walking, we were just all so damned exhausted. The Great Wall of China is just made up of thousands of steps. I think one day we walked 10,000 steps, up 10,000 steps. And so I was sort of not going through the motions, but I think I was just tired and so focused on getting a result for my clients that I wasn't really aware of that. What I will say, though, is when I arrived for the first time on the Great Wall of China, it was very emotional to actually be standing on a site, one of these incredible, extraordinary places in the world that very few people are privileged to go from the West. And we were doing a charity walk for a children's society charity in the UK. We went to parts of the Great Wall that the tourists are not allowed to see. And it was an extraordinary experience. And there is an atmosphere about the Great Wall, definitely. Now, that could be because it's high in the mountains, of course, and mountains are always amazing places to be, but there is an energy about it. And of course, the Inca Trail is quite remarkable as well. What the story for the therapy about the Inca Trail is, on the night before we started the trek, the Children's Society knew about my work, and they knew about the work I'd done in the China Wall the year before. And they said there's quite a few people coming on this trek. I think it was 80 people. Quite a few of them have got height phobias. Do you think there's anything you can do to help them? Because obviously we're going to be walking high up in the Andes we're walking down narrow little pathways with a sheer drop hundreds of feet below. And this was going to be a tough gig for some people. Do you think you can help them? So on the night before we started the trek, I did a group session with 12 people, I think it was. And by the end of the trek, every single person had come to me and said, thank you. It's been amazing. I wasn't scared once. I didn't have a single problem. Again, the power of the mind. And of course, Machu Picchu is just an amazing place, as you can imagine.
You, Steve, did something that boggles my mind. That was to spend a night in your own grave. What was your reason for doing it?
It was all part of my spiritual process. So I'd been a Buddhist for a number of years. I was a practicing Buddhist, but after a while, it felt a bit religious at times. So I sort of started thinking, well, part of my past life background is as a Native American. So I joined a group in the UK that were teaching shamanism, Native American shamanism. So part of the ceremonies and the rituals that we did, and we did quite a lot, obviously, in nature. For example, we did a lot of sweat lodges. I did lots of sweat lodges, which are very intense experiences. But this particular experience was a ceremony called Making an Ally of Death. And so there was a group of us on a beautiful, very large farm in the middle of England in the hills, miles away from everybody. And we had to spend a full day digging our own grave. So it was 6 feet down. We had to hack through and dig it out. And having done a ceremony at dusk, we were then put into our own grave, and it was covered in boards, and then the earth, and then tarpaulin was put on the boards. Earth was piled up on the top of it, just leaving a small hole for me to get into. And then that was closed up with just a little bit of a hole a small hole to get air through. And we then had a ceremony all night long to do in the grave. And I can't remember what the ceremony was now, but initially, I mean, I was worried. I mean, it's just a weird thing to do, obviously, but it was a scary thing to do. Having said that, what happened is I felt extraordinarily comfortable. It was as though I was being cradled by Mother Earth. It was just a really calming, beautiful experience. I was being cradled by Mother Earth, and I survived the night. I really did. Amazing experience, though.
I would imagine. In addition to spending the night in your own grave, another strange adventure you went on was to spend time in prison with Britain's most violent prisoner. What was that all about?
I sometimes tell people that I spent 3 years in prison and then realize I should have rephrased that. So, just at the start of my hypnotherapy career, I was invited to teach stress management and meditation to prisoners in the local prison in the city where I lived. So I used to go in there and work with the standard, you could call them run-of-the-mill prisoners, most of them young lads in the teens or in the 20s, doing stress management work. And then I was invited to go onto a particular wing in the prison. It was called A Wing. And this wing was only for what are called Category A prisoners. These are murderers and all-round baddies. And it was a wing where they were just given time to get their heads together away from the main prison system. I was asked if I'd like to go in there and do some work with them. And so I did meet several murderers, and I would sit meditating in a cell with a murderer, which is a really bizarre experience. But I was then introduced to Charlie Bronson, who in the UK is a legend. He's spent most of his life in prison. He spent over half of his life in prison. He's an armed robber, or he was an armed robber. And the prison system has done its best to break him, and it's never broken him. Now, this Charlie's a big man. He does about 3,000 press-ups a day. He doesn't sleep on a bed. He sleeps on the floor. He don't want to get soft. And in fact, there was a movie with Tom Hardy playing him called Bronson some years ago, which gives a good idea of Charlie's power and strengths. And it was very strange. We got on very well together. We got on like a house on fire. And what we discovered in that prison is that Charles Bronson had an incredible artistic talent. Nobody had found this before. They'd always just treated him as a thug. But we found there was a little artistic boy in there, inside this grown man, who loved to draw, who loved to do artistic things. And Charlie found out that I was a part-time writer. And so he came up with an idea for us to write a radio play together. And the radio play was all of Charlie's idea. Well, I put so much in, but the concept was his. And I include quite a bit of it in the book to give people an idea of just how good this radio play is. I just got on so well with him. I have a lot of respect for this man. He's still in prison. Now, he's being held in prison wrongly, in my opinion, because he's never murdered anybody. He's got very, in his world, strong moral tones. And there are people going in and out of prison having raped and murdered for a few years. This man's been in over half of his life. He's now 68, I think. And he's no longer a danger to the public. He calls himself now Charles Salvador, after Salvador Dali, the great artist. And he sells his paintings for charity. And the British government insist on keeping him in prison, which is so wrong, in my opinion. So, yeah, it was quite an experience, because you would have thought this big, gruff Cockney Londoner would have batted me away fairly quickly, but we got on so well. I have a lot of respect for Charlie Bronson. I really do.
When it comes to physical pains, challenges, or illnesses that people face, is it possible to categorize which ones can be caused by past life experiences and which ones are purely a result of the body we live in today?
My world is, I see it as a fact, all physical illness has emotional causes. So what that means is that underneath the physical illness, there are emotional energies which are causing the issue. So any issue, any physical issue, any physical pain can come from previous lives, can come from trauma in this life, or even our ancestors' lives, because I do a lot of ancestral trauma release, because we can inherit traumas from our ancestors in our bloodline. And in the book, I mentioned quite a few of these. So, for example, it may be somebody comes in with a bad back, and we found that in a past life, they've been speared in the back and killed. Relive the death, Sometimes some clients relive the death in quite a dramatic way, but it releases the energy. We relive the death, the energy dissolves away, and the pain goes away. So this is the concept. In the book, I write about a lady who had cancer, lip cancer. Now, I'm not claiming to cure cancer, that would be foolish, though we did find there were two past lives which were causing her cancer. In one of the past lives, she was a young woman, a noble woman, living in a castle, let's say, in medieval times. And she was a very seductive 16-year-old girl. And she had a male servant, and she was very flighty around him. And he got the wrong signals from her. And one day kissed her. Oh, well, she went berserk. That was completely, no servant should ever touch or kiss the lady. And the boy ran away. He was frightened. He knew he'd done something very bad. And she didn't know what to do. And she thought, well, if I tell my father, he'll have him killed. So she actually told her sister, who told her father, who had the boy executed. Remember, she got lip cancer. So this is about speaking out. You know, there's often a symbolic aspect to illness. In the second past life, she was an African woman who was down by the river doing some washing in a tribe, when one of the village elders came and raped her and then left her and walked off. And first of all, obviously, that was devastating enough. But secondly, she knew that she couldn't tell anybody about it. A, because he was a village elder, nobody would believe her. B, she would then be looked upon as tainted and she would never find a husband. So she couldn't speak out. So again, the symbolic aspect of lip cancer, she couldn't speak out. So all of that locked in energy was here in the face throughout her life, and it came out in the form of lip cancer. So we did these sessions. She went and had also some kinesiology sessions. Kinesiology is an incredible therapy process. And 5 months later, she emailed me to say they couldn't find a trace of cancer in her body. I don't know why that was.
When it comes to past lives and reincarnation, just about everyone is curious to know just how many past lives do we usually live, and can we be reborn as animals? You, Steve, have the answers to those questions. What are they?
Well, I'll come on to the animals in a moment. First of all, the number of past lives. The likelihood is, for the vast majority of people on Earth now, we've lived thousands of lives, tens of thousands of lives. Now, Tibetan Buddhism says we've lived countless lives over aeons, countless aeons of existence. I don't know how true that is, but my sense and experience is that most of us have lived many lifetimes in the thousands on Earth, and that's without being reborn on other planets, etc. However, it does appear that some people are relatively new to Earth, and some people would call them new souls. Either that means that they have had past lives on other planets and now they've come into human form, or it could be, but I don't know how this could be done, they could be created as new souls in some way. So that's something I can't quantify. And certainly, I mean, I remember some years ago, I use a therapy technique where I ask my clients' subconscious, whilst they're in trance, to take control of a finger. And the finger moves all by itself, so I can get yes/no answers to my questions. And there was one gentleman came for therapy. He was a teacher, a primary school teacher, teacher of young children. And he always had a very light energy about him. He was almost naive in a way. And he asked me one day, because we were talking about it, he said, I wonder how many lives I've had here on Earth. So I asked his subconscious. And I was expecting, it could be 10,000, 5,000, 3,000. His subconscious, because I was counting, I said something like, is it more than 100 lives? No. Okay. Because if it had been more than 100, I'd have said, is it more than 1,000? And kept going up. But I brought it down. He'd had 33 past lives on Earth. And that really surprised me. But it shows that some people are newer than others. As for animal past lives, now these are unusual and we don't get many of them. There is a school of thought, I think, in sort of spiritualist churches or in spiritualism, that once we've achieved a human form or a human rebirth, then we stay in that rebirth. We can't regress, as they would say, back into animal form. I don't agree. I've had not lots, but quite a few clients over the years who have had past lives as animals. Usually those past lives are very short and a bit brutish. Usually, I had one lady who had very bad allergies, or allergies have got emotional causes. People think, well, it's an allergy, I have to take tablets for it. There are always emotional causes to allergies. And we found she was in one life, she was a rat, which ran across a road and got run over by some sort of old car. In another lifetime, she was a squirrel, and people were trying to come and catch the squirrels to drive them out of the forest to kill them. And she had to move further and further away from the forest. She did survive. I had one lady some years ago who had a spider phobia, and she had a past life as a squid. Again, you got to think, none of my clients are weird. None of my clients have got psychiatric problems. These are all normal people with just issues. So they're not sort of coming to me with the tongue hanging out, dribble drops coming down the chin, I want to talk about being an animal. It's nothing like that. These people are just both standard human beings as we are who have an issue. But the subconscious takes them into these animal past lives in order to clear the problem. The lady with the squid, she was a young baby squid who was sort of forced out of the family nest too early because there were a lot of youngsters. And she was then swimming around in terror, expecting to get eaten at any second. And there were things coming for her, and she was flicking around trying to hide. And she found eventually a small sort of cave in a rock, and she hid in the cave in the darkness. And there are big fishes coming to try and bite her and grab her at the entrance to the cave, and they couldn't get to her. And she felt a real sense of relief until she realized she wasn't the only thing in that cave. There was something behind her, and it was coming towards her to eat her. So she managed to escape, although I think she lost a tentacle in the experience. But she managed to sort of then survive and grow to adult life in that past life. Yeah, this does happen occasionally. You could say, well, why did she go into that past life? Because the subconscious took her there, not because she thought, oh, I'll be a squid today.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yakker want to buy The Adventures of a Hypnotherapist, Was I Under? Learn about other books you've authored and the therapy sessions you offer. How, Steve, can they do that?
Okay, the books, all the books, the Adventures of a Hypnotherapist is my new book. Previous books, Power of Past Life Regression, Famous Past Lives, they're all available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all booksellers. If people want to contact me, my website, steveburgesshypnosis.com, steveburgesshypnosis.com. I also have a YouTube channel called Hypno for All, HYPNO, the number 4ALL. And that contains free hypnotherapy recordings for all sorts of issues. I'm a great believer in giving stuff away. So for people who can't afford therapy, there are 26 free hypnotherapy recordings on there. Also, there are a lot of interviews that I've done, video interviews with my team members about all different aspects of regression therapy, some of the stuff we've talked about today. So I always like to people to go to my YouTube channel and obviously subscribe to it if they will. And my Facebook page is The Power of Past Life Regression. And of course, I'm on Instagram, even though I don't understand Instagram. I don't understand it at all. That's Steve Burgess Hypnotherapy. That's me in a nutshell.
Perfect. Steve Burgess, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yakker. I very much enjoyed yakking with you and wish you success with all that you do.
Thank you so much, Stan. It's been a real pleasure being with you.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallard of Paranormal Yakker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.